Hi and welcome to this lesson on If by Rudyard Kipling. So this is quite an interesting poem, really. It's super famous and it just ends up being one of the most popular poems ever. I think he wrote it initially, I read somewhere that he wrote it for his son, and it's definitely about maturity, and it's about how do you kind of stand all of the difficulties of the world, and how do you grow up to be a good balanced person with a kind of moderate character that's both compassionate and also quite strong and unbreakable. So it's really interesting, all of the different things that he looks at, and you'll notice that it uses a lot of antithesis, which is a technique that is about extremes, one side and another. So being lied about, don't deal in lies. Being hated, don't give way to hating. There's one extreme and another, and he's always in the middle and taking the middle position in this poem. So yeah, it's about moderation. It's about balancing your character. It's about how to kind of grow and adapt and mature in a positive way to suit your kind of future self and your environment. So the first thing to do with this poem, as with all scribbly poems, is to read them aloud and try and get a sense of the sounds that are going on, the rhythm, the pacing, any lines or particular images that stick out to you as you do that as well. So you can pause me and read the poem aloud, and then when you're ready, we'll come back and jump into the analysis. So it's quite a long poem. It's quite intense. There's a lot of ideas here. Hopefully, it roughly made sense to you. There might be some vocab that wasn't quite clear, so I've outlined some vocab here for you just to take a quick look at. Mostly this vocab is just a little bit old-fashioned, so they're words and phrases that people would have really known at the time that it was written, and nowadays we maybe don't use them as much anymore. Some of them we do, some of them we don't. So to make allowance for something, it means to sort of allow something, really, to accept it even if it's a problem or if it's flawed. Doubt is just when you don't trust something or someone. That we do use nowadays quite a lot still. An imposter is a fake person who pretends to be someone they're not. So imposters, you kind of find them in I don't know, kind of detective series a lot, where people are pretending to be someone and it's revealed that they're not, that kind of thing. So quite often it's tied up with a professional sense, someone pretending to do a job that is not correct, or saying they have qualifications that they don't have, that kind of thing. Knaves are dishonest or sneaky people. This is quite an old-fashioned word, but I quite like it, knave. The will, in this case, you'll notice is capitalized, so he's referring to a force here, to willpower. It's not just like a will that you write at the end of your life or anything like that. So he means willpower. He means the force in our minds that has a kind of driving, motivating factor behind it. In philosophy and religion, we have quite a lot of debate over what willpower is, if it even exists, or whether we're just it's like something we tell ourselves exists to make ourselves feel better. There's this idea of, do we have free will or not? Do we have freedom over our choices and our actions? Or are our lives deterministic? Are they already set for us because we're born into a certain position in society, or there's all these different kind of strong influences on us that really we can't fight against? So it's actually a lot about this idea, the willpower, and that that will kind of come across as we go through the poem. So I want you to think about that as we're going through and analysing it deeper. Virtue, finally, is another kind of old word. It means goodness or purity. A virtuous person is a really pure, good person. So I've done a little summary of what's going on here. The first thing is, it's not a narrative poem, it's a lyric. So a lyric poem, that's the form that it is a poem that expresses and explores an idea. So it doesn't have a full story to it. It's more an exploration of a concept. So in this case, it's about wise advice, what we should do and how we should be in life, also how we should not be and what to avoid, and to not just copy the bad behavior in others. So I'll give you a breakdown of the stanzas then and what's going on in each one. You might want to kind of re-look over the stanza while I'm doing this so that it makes sense to you. You can make annotations there as well if it helps. So stanza 1, we want to stay strong and clear-headed even if other people are hostile. They're kind of dangerous or mean or kind of not nice towards us. To trust ourselves even if other people don't trust us. But also as a balance to accept that they might doubt us, to encourage patience, to not lie even if people do lie about us, not hate even if we're hated ourselves. Those are that antithesis that I was going on about at the beginning. And finally, not to boast or seem too perfect or clever. We shouldn't look too good nor talk too wise. So there's a mixture of trying to be a really good person, not being badly affected by people, and also not being too arrogant or vociferous, not like kind of telling people we're great all the time. Even if we think we're great, we should be moderate. We shouldn't make it really obvious that we're geniuses or anything like that if you think that you're a genius. It's just about moderation. It's about being aware of all these different possibilities and finding your way through them in a way that is sensitive to other people and also true to yourself and your own character. So stanza 2, we have a bit more about thoughts and actions. We should think and dream, but don't let these thoughts or dreams control us. We shouldn't be influenced too much by extreme triumph or failure, success or failure, triumph or disaster. So again, an antithesis, something that is really positive, like a triumph, a great victory, something that is really negative that happens, disaster, failure. So the idea is that we should have a strong sense of ourselves to the point where we're confident in ourselves and we don't change too much, no matter how amazing or how bad our day is, or something amazing happening shouldn't really make us any different from how we are anyway, because we should already be happy with ourselves. And equally, something terrible happening shouldn't really change us too much, because we should be happy and stable within our own character. Even if our truth is manipulated by others, if we say and do good things and other people turn that against us or twist that, I'm sure most of you have experienced this happening to you at some point in your life. I definitely have. Where you try and be a good person, try and do things that are good or say things that you really believe in, and people kind of misinterpret and twist it a little bit. We shouldn't, be too affected by that. We should withstand that, accept that it's happened, but not let it hurt us or affect us too badly. If we work super hard and everything we've worked towards is broken or unravels, again, we shouldn't be too affected by that. We should just work to fix it. So if you put loads of effort in and then it doesn't work out and you're like, what's the point? You shouldn't stay with that feeling of what is the point. You should be like, well, I'm going to work at it again and I'm going to keep going until it's not broken anymore. So it's this motivational force. And again, think about this idea of willpower. It's about your willpower has to beat everything else that might affect you in life, both positive and negative. So stanza 3, then, we have this idea of perseverance, again, with the willpower, never giving up. If you persevere, you just keep going no matter what. If you think of it as like, I don't know, you're running a marathon or something and you're really tired and your muscles hurt, but you're like, I'm going to go anyway. That's perseverance. So you can do that with mental things as well as with physical things. You can kind of push your body to its limit, but you can also push your mind to its limit. And people don't tend to think of psychology that way, but it does. From experience, personal experience, it does work. So even though there's success and failure, we should be able to lose everything that we've earned and still have the motivation to build it back up. So even if we work all our lives to become a millionaire and suddenly something happens and that £1,000,000 or whatever we have is gone, we shouldn't just stop there and be like, well, there's no point. We should be motivated and build it back up again. And we should never complain about the loss that we've incurred. We should push our nerves and emotions as far as they'll go, and then some more, by making our willpower stronger than anything else. So if your willpower is the strongest thing about you, your determination, your strength of character, your comfort, I guess, in yourself, your confidence in yourself, being happy with who you are as a person, if that's very strong and stable, everything else around that can be all chaotic and it can rise and fall. And at the end of the day, you'll still come out of it well. Finally, in stanza 4, as well as all this idea of greatness and pushing forwards and always aiming for success, even if we're temporarily defeated, we have this opposite side. We have this idea of being humble. Staying humble means just not boasting too much or being arrogant or being overconfident or thinking too greatly of yourself. So even if you are really great and you've worked really hard and you feel like you deserve everything you've achieved in life, which is a good thing, you still shouldn't be like, I'm brilliant and you're all rubbish. That kind of idea is not, probably when I said that, you had this kind of feeling like, oh, I don't like that. That it's not a nice thing to say to other people. It's not a good way to form social relationships. It's not very kind or considerate. So despite how great you are, stay humble. Keep your individuality and goodness when you're talking to crowds. So don't just follow everybody else, but also stay in touch with everyday people, even if you end up being in a very high status. Make sure everyone likes you, but doesn't obsess over you. It's quite interesting, that idea. And if you can fill even the smallest amount of time with something that helps you achieve your long-term projects and goals, then the earth will be yours and you will be fully mature, fully an adult. So there's a lot of difference between being old and being an adult, or being older and being mature. Probably you know people, I definitely know people who are age 60 and above who don't follow Kipling's idea of maturity. And I know people who are maybe 10 and they have quite a lot of this to their character already. So it's not really about the age that you're at, it's about the process of growth in your character and the confidence levels in yourself and how happy you are with yourself, and also how stable you can be relative to all this kind of chaos around you. So the idea is that if you want long-term serious success and happiness, this is the key to it. Staying moderate, not giving in to all of these different variables, because at the center you have this sense of confidence and willpower. Hopefully, you're starting to understand why this is such a long-lasting poem that people love and they read time and again, decade after decade. So we'll look a bit more at the speaker now. The speaker is the person who's speaking in the poem, so the voice of the poem. It might or might not be Kipling, but it does feel like it's Kipling himself who's giving this advice. They have a personal, emotional, and motivational tone, which is supposed to inspire readers. So you're meant to read this and feel quite kind of motivated yourself. Like, yeah, I'm going to go out and do this and be this kind of person. He's very passionate and positive, but also balanced. He's not just like only accepting good with no bad. He understands that there's difficulty in the world. There are ups and downs. So as well as he says, don't get carried away with the bad, he also says, don't get carried away with the good. Stay moderate rather than extreme throughout all of this. In terms of language, there's a lot of techniques here, and I'm just going to whiz through a few of the most important rather than giving you everything. So feel free to pause and read through in more detail, or if you're on the Scribbly page, you can download this as a PDF as well and look through it. But I'm just going to give you a bit of a flavor of what language there is here. So one thing that's really important is some of these words, as I mentioned before with will, they're capitalized. They have a capital letter at the beginning. This means they're personified. They're actually given characters in the poem. They're not just ideas anymore, but they're actually characters. So he calls triumph and disaster imposters. He actually says that both of these are bad. Victory and defeat are fake. Might sound a little bit weird. Just realized I spelled triumph wrong here. Hang on. Triumph. It's a hard word, isn't it? Yeah, it might seem a bit weird that success is fake. It's a strange thing to think. Or disaster doesn't matter. Those kinds of feelings are those thoughts are a little bit unsettling with the feelings of them. But actually what he's saying is that they're all just temporary, and you're just taking a random point in your life where you're like, yeah, this is amazing, everything went perfect, or this is terrible, everything went awful. And you're not seeing it long term, you're just seeing it in terms of that moment of success or that moment of failure. Whereas everything is a continual process, and you'll go down from a moment of great success back to your normal everyday routine or life. But you'll also go up from a moment of total disaster back to your normal routine or life. So he's saying that how we are in those moments in between triumph and disaster is way more important than those moments themselves. Don't just, measure yourself and your own happiness by the best moment of your life. Measure it by who you are all of the time, most of the time, in most situations. And the same with disaster. Don't think of like your life as this one terrible moment that happened to you. Think of it as a continuum, and yes, that thing happened, but your average is much higher than that moment, how you are on an average day. So, we also have anaphora. This is where you repeat something, and the word if, which is also the title, is repeated over and over. It shows it's a really significant word. If is the beginning of what's called a conditional clause. This is a type of clause that tells us future possible things that might happen. So if this thing happens, then that thing will happen. So the whole poem's like an argument that's building. It's like, if you can do this and that and this other thing and avoid that, then you'll be a man. Then you'll be a full adult, a fully mature person. So the whole thing is a conditional sentence, basically. So the idea of if is that there's loads of these different possible ways you can be and ways you can react. And it's making us sensitive and aware of those possibilities and helping us to kind of judge how we're going to respond to those before we actually are placed in those moments. So as the poem progresses, it kind of builds in greatness, but it also builds in a sense of balance with doubt and uncertainty. So there's a kind of balance between positives and negatives, and it helps us navigate through those by repeating this word if. A couple of form structure points now. The ending, I feel, is anticlimactic. It's like, if you can do all this amazing stuff, then what? Oh, you'll be a man. You know what I mean? It's like, what? Like, I have to do all of this just to be a person. You know what I mean? It's kind of, I don't know. To me, it was anticlimactic. I was like expecting something greater, like you'll be a genius or a hero or something. But no, you'll just be a person if you manage to do all of these really grand things. So it seems less grand than we were expecting. But actually, what he's showing is that it takes a lot of strength to be a man or a woman or, a mature adult being rather than a child. And not everyone manages to achieve this in their life, I was saying. So he's actually saying that to be a strong person takes so much effort, and we should be really proud of ourselves if we feel like we've even achieved part of that. It has a didactic message. It's intended to teach us about the best way to be successful, happy, and fulfilled in life. And it's a kind of perfect situation as well. So he's saying you need to always be working on being this kind of person, not like we should be like this all the time. Every time we have a success, we don't celebrate, and every time we have a triumph, a failure, we ignore it. He's not saying that. He's saying that the ideal mature person is like this, and we should strive towards that, because the closer we can get to that, the more control we'll have over our character and the more happiness we'll find within ourselves. You may or may not agree with him as well, and it's always good to have your own opinion on poetry. and any literature that you study. So feel free to disagree if you think that maturity is something different, or what it takes to be a man or a woman rather than a child is different from what Kipling says here. Personally, I think I roughly agree with him. I've not actually thought about it in detail, so I'm just kind of pausing now. Yeah, I think I mostly agree that I spent maybe the last 12, 14 years of my life trying to be kind of like the person he describes in the poem, not letting things affect me too much, not being too arrogant if something goes well, not being too down if something goes badly. All of that kind of stuff is very hard to do. And I feel like I'm a more stable person now than I was when I was a teenager, and I used to be way too emotionally affected by everything. So I was like a very enthusiastic person. I still am, I think, but yeah, a bit more moderate now. So yeah, so think if this works for you or not. I think it works for certain personality types more than others as well. And yeah, some people definitely will have different ideas on what it takes to be a mature person. There's certainly a lot of strength to this type of character, and that's what he's saying. In terms of other structure points, we have octaves. So every stanza in the poem is regular. It's an 8-line stanza. We call this an octave. It has a regular rhyme scheme, alternate rhyme, A, B, C, D, C, D. So it goes back and forth with sound. And that represents, again, this antithetical balance of positive and negative that goes through the whole poem. So he's like, if you can be like this, but also not like that, or if you can equally take this and this extreme and be in the middle, then you'll be mature. So the idea is there's all these kinds of extremes that we experience in life, and you have to navigate kind of securely and safely through those by always being moderate and in control of your own character. So yeah, this rhyme scheme represents that variation in life, but the regularity of those stanzas represents that kind of stable center that he's talking about with his personality and character. So again, with the form structure, there's more kind of notes and points there. Feel free to pause and read through those if you feel they'll be helpful for you. There's also this one here. So I'm going to outline some of the attitudes in this one, because the attitudes really help you write a good essay. If you understand what is the message of the writer behind the story, behind the words, then you're going to write a good essay. And if you don't get that, you might be able to write loads of analysis on it, but it's all going to feel like it's all over the place and it's not really got any point. So with every poem, you want to be like, what is the point? What is the message? And work backwards from that, because that will give you a very well tied together kind of strong argument in your essay. So firstly, success is not constant. Even if you have a great moment of triumph, you might actually fall quite heavily from that point. You won't always stay at this point of success or keep being more and more and more successful with no dips. So it's important to respect that in life we have moments of success, moments of failure, ups and downs, times when things seem better than normal, times when things seem worse. It's not constant and it's not stable. So we have to be stable instead to be able to kind of manage through all of that chaos. He also says something quite interesting. He says basically we should risk it all and lose, which I don't know if I necessarily agree with this one. I think it's like, I agree with him in principle, but I don't think I'm quite mature enough to be like, yeah, I could do this. The idea is basically, once you got to a point of total success, you should just throw it all away and start again. Because if you do that, if you get to this point of everything's great and then you just give it all up and you start from the bottom and then you still succeed, you know that it's not the stuff that you had that makes you a great person. It's something inner that you're never going to lose about yourself. So your character is the thing that makes you great, not whatever you've worked to build around you. So Yeah, I agree with this in principle. I think I'm definitely not at that point yet myself. I might never be. But I do agree with him that if you have total confidence and control over your own character, you should be able to just lose everything and build it back up even better than it was before, because it's about your own self rather than whatever money or kind of success you've achieved in life. It gives you a lot of knowledge and self-respect to be like this, to be able to weather the storm. So the idea of self-respect, I think, is very important. Self-confidence and self-respect. It's also about how do we be happy in life. So obviously people debate this forever. There's millions of different opinions on whether, where happiness comes from. Kipling's opinion is that happiness comes from self-control. So, if I buy lobster, it's not going to make me happy. Or if I buy a really fancy car, it's not going to make me happy. I buy a beautiful house or a nice dress or something, it might make me really briefly, temporarily happy, but it's not going to be like, that's it, I'm just happy for the rest of my life kind of thing. If I get control over my own self and my own character, then I can always be in a state of happiness and confidence. And the more happy I am with myself, the more individual I can be as well. So this is the idea behind it. If you can assert your own individuality in a crowd, but also empathize with why everybody else thinks a different way, then you're going to have this kind of perfect character and this key to happiness. So again, figure out if you agree or disagree with that, because it's an interesting opinion, I think. So individuality, just to kind of reiterate, is important for happiness. If you just feel like you're copying everyone else all the time, you don't have your own sense of self, then you're not going to be happy, because you won't feel like you're being true to your own personality or to your own being. And finally, we should all aim for virtue, not perfection. So being a perfectionist is not going to make you happy. This is something I had to learn, because I was very much a perfectionist. I probably still am, to be honest. But it's not being perfect at something that brings happiness. It's being a good person. It's having a virtuous, pure, generous, kind character. And I know it sounds really cliched and kind of silly that, like, you just need to be a good, kind person in life and you'll be happy. It's not necessarily just that if you're kind, that's it, you're happy. But if you work on your character, always being good, and actions that you make coming from a point of goodness, not a point of wanting to be perfect, that will progress you a lot further in life than if you take a perfectionist attitude. So he takes a realistic approach, and if we remain true to ourselves and our own good-natured character, then we can break out of any difficult situation. So I think he thinks that being a perfectionist is not as likely to bring you happiness as being good in your kind of inner being. So a couple of pieces of context and some themes just to finish off. We have this idea that it's a stoic attitude to life. Stoicism is a type of philosophy that promotes balance, and it's quite logical. It's not so emotional. So the idea is, don't let your emotions just kind of run away with themselves, and your emotions don't control you, you control them. I don't know if you've heard that idea before. That's quite a stoical idea, and Kipling has quite a stoic attitude in this poem. There's this idea that, a debate about, is it actually my son, his own son that he's talking to? Or is it just kind of generally, he's like, you'll be a man, my son. He's just talking to whoever's reading the poem. That's an ambiguous thing. So when you're analysing, you can say perhaps it's for his own son or perhaps it's for a general audience. Either way, the advice is the same. Maybe Kipling feels that in a way all of his readers are kind of like his children, because they're reading his poems and his stories. Very famous kids story writer. So yeah, maybe it's got a double kind of sense there. published in 1910, which is quite a while ago now, 110 years ago. At this time, people have a stiff upper lip mentality. It's kind of coming out of the Victorian era, but it feels quite Victorian to me. It feels more Victorian than modern. So technically it's written in the modern era, but these ideas are quite kind of stiff upper lip. So stiff upper lip means you don't show your emotions. You always remain strong. You shouldn't kind of give in to sadness or extreme happiness or anything like that. It's quite an old-fashioned British way of being as well. So it's a very British kind of opinion that he's expressing in this poem. So it's quite Victorian, quite British, which is why you might disagree with it, because maybe you're not from Britain and you have a different attitude in your culture to what success or happiness is. Maybe you are British, but you're modern British, not kind of traditional, in which case, again, you might disagree with this type of poem. So we have a lot of themes here. Basically, with these themes, these are what your question in an essay, an exam might be made up of. So you want to go through these themes, you want to find quotes for them, maybe do mind maps, something like that. Figure out what you think Kipling's message is about all of these. And if you do a little bit of kind of playing around with that, you should be really well prepared for your exams. So hopefully you're feeling very motivated. You're feeling like you're an individual that can be successful. And hopefully you found this lesson quite useful and you feel a lot more confident on the poem. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.